How about now? There we go. Seems to work, right? We can almost get through one of these without everything being busted. And hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Testing, testing. There's a huge delay between the chat. Is there still nothing? Come on, I need one person to tell me that there's audio now. Yeah, nice. Okay. Huge delay. Okay, sorry about that. What was I doing? I must have connected my OBS setup to something else. Also, it crashed before I started streaming, so um, there's that. But I looked over. I was talking to myself for a little bit, I guess. I looked over, and the waveform itself was just like, if you farted, I heard it. Oh no, I didn't do that. But I looked over at OBS, which is on my other monitor, and as I'm talking, the waveform like wasn't moving. So I'm like, oh no. And then there's no obvious way to tell what's going on. But I think I was recording a podcast with someone, and I think that's probably what it was. The audio wasn't working on their platform, or there was like background noise or something. So I tried switching over, and I guess it stayed stuck like that. So, yeah, I'm a little bit sick. So if my voice sounds a little funny, I'm sorry. Um, just how it is. But what I was saying when I was muted apparently was that if you've never been on these before, these live streams are very much an AMA format. So I know the chat's working now because I see people typing in the chat. Definitely feel free to ask questions if you've been here before. You know how it works, right? So I will kind of pause whatever I'm talking about after I wrap up a thought. And I'm happy to answer questions on software engineering career stuff. As always, just my perspective. I'm happy to entertain different perspectives and stuff. Hello from Germany. Good to see you. Um, and yeah, it's supposed to be interactive. Like I say, like I make YouTube videos and stuff, so I could just be recording videos. I'd rather be engaging with you folks though and trying to answer stuff. So today's topic, if there are no questions and stuff, I'll be going through this newsletter article. If you're on Substack, because you can't see the screen I'm sharing and you have to watch me record off my phone, which is sorry, just the way it is. You're on Substack already, so you know where my newsletter is. But it's going to be navigating a mid-career tech stack change. So this was submitted as a topic on Code Commute, which is the vlog YouTube channel I have, and I thought it would be a good one to go through because it had the most views and engagement from the week, and that's how I've been trying to pick my topics. So if you're not familiar with Code Commute, it's one of my two YouTube can't speak one of my two YouTube channels. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, you're watching this on my main channel, Dev Leader. Code Commute is the other one I have. Unedited videos. They're either vlogged from right here or generally when I'm driving to or from CrossFit or to or from work. And yeah, more of a stream of consciousness attempt to answer questions that folks submit, or I go to Reddit and see what's up. But this one's going to be about switching tech stacks mid-career. So this is the audience that this is intended for is not necessarily folks that are brand new to software development, but that's not to say that it wouldn't be useful. And the reason why I think that it still can be useful for beginners is because the reality is, like, when you're trying to switch between tech stacks and programming languages, this is something that I think a lot of people when they're starting out get really worried about, because the amount of time and effort I see people that haven't really started yet getting paralyzed by, like, how do I pick the best language or the best tech stack or the best whatever. They it's almost like they don't even get started because they're too busy trying to optimize. But the reality is, like, you just got to get started and then you can switch to things later. So that's what the topic's going to be about. If you don't want to subscribe to the newsletter or anything, that's totally fine. But I would recommend, if you like these live streams, aside from the technical glitches, definitely check out weekly.devleader.ca. I put out a newsletter every Saturday. That will be generally the topic of the live stream. So if you're like, hey, I want to join next week and I want to know what the topic is, you got Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to figure it out. And make a decision, I guess. So, with that said, let's dive into this topic. So, the sort of main questions that I think I saw coming up with this, when it's like, okay, so you've been working for a bit, and when I say a bit, you can quantify this however you'd like in terms of years of experience. But say you start with a language and a tech stack, so you're a JavaScript or TypeScript developer, you're working a lot in React, maybe building with Node.js and stuff, and you've been doing this for a year, 2, 3 years, and you're going, okay, this has been cool, and for whatever reason, right, you're like, I'm seeing maybe it's trends shifting, or perhaps you're, I don't know, you're feeling like there's other opportunities that you'd rather pursue, or even your interests are changing, right? So you're like, hey, I know that I've been doing a lot of web development. I've been using JavaScript a lot, but I'm just making this up, right? Like, I've always wanted to build video game engines, and like everything I read about that is like people saying that I need to know C++ and I need to kind of work in languages like that, and that's what I want to do, and that's the direction I'm heading in. Like, you're set on wanting to go in a different direction that you're currently in. The fears that I've seen come up around this are like, number one, like, is this going to have a really negative impact on your career? Number two, are you kind of are you starting from scratch, right? So, and when I say starting from scratch, I mean like in your role. So you're like, okay, the company that I'm at, they don't make video games. I'm just going with this example, right? They don't make video games. They don't use C++. That's what I want to be doing. So if I have to go somewhere else, or maybe switch teams, right? Maybe it's still internal, or I have to go to a different company. Do I have to start back as a entry-level developer? I might have 4 or 5 years of experience working with, like, professionally with JavaScript and React, but with C++, 0 years, right? Like, I've just started, and does that mean my career sort of resets? And then the other question is like, is it even worth doing? Right? I'm 5 years in. Shouldn't I just stick with the things that I know and that I'm building my experience in so far? Like, wouldn't that make more sense? And Doggy said in the YouTube chat, switching tech stacks since 1985. This is a common thing. So Doggy has has been doing this for a little bit. That's longer than I've been alive. And I would wager longer than a bunch of people, if not most people watching this, have been alive. So if you don't want to believe anything I'm about to say about this topic, then at least you have Doggy here in the chat that's saying that this is a common thing. And I haven't, there's no additional comment on this. So if Doggy wants to add in more context, I would suspect that they've been able to do this with success, right? If they've been doing this since 1985, I suspect that wasn't, oh, I did this once and that was the end of my career. It's a common thing. It's probably happened a whole bunch, and I'm sure their career has gone well. And that's why, however many years later, I'm going to be 36 this year. That's 89. Add another 4 years. Another 40 years. Been doing this for 40 years. It all started with that C64 basic in games. It always starts with games, right? Actually, a quick note on that. Sorry, I'm going to be coughing and stuff. I'll try to. I don't have this stupid thing hooked up where, like, I should be able to, like, press a mute button or something. I don't know. I bought this and then I never plugged it in. So one day. So I'm going to try to get the mic out of my face so I can cough in the other direction. But a quick note on the game comment is that I ran a survey, or a poll, I guess you'd call it, on LinkedIn. Um, was it on LinkedIn or maybe Twitter? Maybe it wasn't even a poll. Maybe it was just a comment thread. But um, there are a ton of people who got into programming, and like primarily because they were like, I want to do stuff with games, like including myself. Right, tons of people, their first projects are like, I'm building a game, and it's all different styles and stuff. So pretty cool that that's a common thing for people. Um, okay, so when I started writing this article, I thought it was important to kind of for yourself figure out why you want to switch, right? Like um, when we're making decisions like this, I think it's important to do a bit of a reflection and understand why. And that way you have like sort of clear motivations. And so I was giving you a contrived example with switching from, full stack JavaScript developer over to video games and C++, just because it's the most random first example I could think of. But I think it's important for you to understand why, because especially if you're feeling pressure from different directions, there's nothing wrong with making a switch. I just think it's important that when you're trying to like to weigh your options out, you're understanding why you want to do that. So to give you an example, right? Perhaps it's just a matter of you're realizing your current environment and you're going, I don't want to get stale or stagnant, and I want to switch things up, and I just want to go into something completely different. I want to hit that, that newbie phase again. I want to feel like I'm learning. I want to feel like I'm growing. And switching tech stacks for me, or just languages alone, would feel like a great way to do that. Nothing wrong with that, but that could be a motivation. It could be that you're bored with what you're doing and you want a different challenge. I gave the example a little bit earlier, but maybe you're working in a tech stack and you're like, it feels like whatever path you pick for a programming language and tech stack, it feels like it's getting kind of dated. Like you're seeing other languages pop up, or a lot of community support with people building packages and frameworks and something else. And you're kind of going like, the ecosystem I'm in, like maybe it felt like it was thriving before, or maybe I wasn't paying attention to it, and it just kind of feels like it's not really there, right? In which case you might say like, maybe I want to switch to something else and make myself feel like I am more employable, for example. And another reason could just be that if you have some data that is suggesting that maybe switching into a different domain with a different tech stack and a different language, like that might be something that is going to come with better compensation, right? Nothing wrong with trying to say, hey, I want to switch over to something, and there's better compensation alignment with that. That could be a motivator. Now, on that last one, what's interesting though is, right, if we're trying to balance this thought of, let's just keep going with this example. This isn't real, by the way. I don't have any data to say this. I'm just going with the example. Hey, I wanted to go into C++ and game development because the compensation is going to be higher. You're balancing that thought with, wait, am I going to be starting off as like a novice developer, even though I might have been, oh, Dave Baginski. Good to see you, man. 10K, yeah, I hit 10K a little while ago now. I have to cough again. I should have got some water before I started streaming. I'm an idiot. But yeah, like if you're balancing this thought of like, is my compensation supposed to go up with this tech stack change versus am I going to be sacrificing being a mid or senior level developer and starting from scratch? Like now all of a sudden you have this game in your head where you're like, well, what's actually going to happen here, right? So, okay, back to the comments here. So Devin, good to see you. Devin's everywhere all the time, which is awesome. Devin says, my first professional language was C#1. And I haven't switched in. So that's before I got started in C#, man. I got started with 2. Or .NET 2. I just keep adding stacks to what I already do. Yeah, I think that's good. And even for me, right, like for folks that see my other content and stuff, I am a C# and .NET developer. I know a couple other things. I just don't really prefer to use them. I'm very comfortable in C# and .NET, so stick to it, and because of my comfort level with it, I feel like I can build most things that I have to get involved with. So it just seems to work. I'm not saying it's the best for all things, but for me, it happens to be very flexible that way. And then Doggy lists off a million different things: Basic, Assembler, Turbo Pascal, C, C++, Perl, PHP, VB6. That was my first language is VB6. And then C# shortly after. There was a VB.NET period right in between that, but VB6 and VB.NET were the dark days for me. JavaScript, TypeScript, React, Next.js, everything. Yeah, there's always that new thing everyone wants. Yeah, it's true. This is going to be a battle with trying to hold in coughs the entire time. Oh, it's funny. I was on like calls and stuff today too, and I guess I'm not talking this much on one-on-ones and stuff, so it's going to be a little rough. So yeah, I think the first thing is really just understanding about like why you want to do this switch. Because if you have an understanding of that, and it's not just like on a whim, and what your motivations truly are, then when you're trying to look at the options and trying to see how you want to navigate this, at least you can come back to this framing. This is why I'm doing it, right? And if the options aren't lining up with that, then perhaps it's not the right action for what your motivations are. So back to the compensation example. Again, I'm just making this up. So I'm hoping that people don't join like mid me explaining this part and then very poor takeaways from this part. But is my LinkedIn is working, right? I think someone joined from LinkedIn. Sorry for the distraction. It should be working. Okay. If we go back to the example of compensation, if you're like, hey, I heard that working in this tech stack and this language has a better compensation because it's going to let me work in finance, or it's going to let me work in the medical field, or whatever. And then you're exploring jobs, and the data that you're coming across is actually not aligning with that. If that was your motivation, maybe the tech stack that you're changing to is not actually the direction you want to be going in, right? So understanding your motivation, I think, is important here. Doggy says the important thing: understand the concepts really well. Then learning new stacks is not that hard, and that's exactly it. This is one. I feel like it's one of those things that sometimes people have to learn like the hard way. Like you have to go live it is what it seems like, because people seem to be very concerned about it, right? If I pick the wrong thing, then my career is screwed, or I'm gonna be behind and like I'll be trapped in this whatever. And it's like that's just not it. And when you spend more time in your career, you start to realize like, thanks, Justin, I appreciate that. You start to realize like you're going to be switching between stuff throughout your entire career. It might not be like every day or every week you're like new tech stack, new language, but between potentially on the same team, different projects, stuff might come up. Like my team, I have team members at Microsoft right now. Most of them work in C#. There are some that work in C# and C++. And there are some that work in C#, C++, and Rust. And then there's PowerShell in there, right? Like, there's a bunch of stuff. So people are going to get exposed to a whole bunch of different things. And like, in my own example that I just gave, like, that could be from project to project that people are working on different tech stacks and languages. Oh my goodness, sorry. So it's just one of those things. Like it's gonna happen in your career. Like it's very likely. Okay. So I wrote down as an actionable tip, like write down your why. Understand that. You can always revisit it. You can always try to refine it, but I think it's important to understand your why. Next part. If you're going to be going down this path of like doing a switch to a different tech stack, programming language, one of the things that I recommend is that when it comes to learning these things, that you try to reduce the friction around it. And I've made videos on this, vlogs on this. We've done live streams together if you've been on every single one of them. Pardon me. I've talked about this where my approach for trying to learn new things is not to change everything all at once. Because let's say that you're trying to, I'm just going to make this up, you're trying to learn a new database technology, right? What I wouldn't recommend you do is go, I've never used MongoDB before. I've only used MySQL. Okay, I want to learn Mongo. Well, since I'm learning Mongo, I better go pick a new programming language. I've never used Python before, so I'm going to use Python and Mongo. And I've never deployed that into AWS before, so I'm going to go deploy into a new cloud provider with Python using MongoDB. Like, stop. um, unless you just get a lot of enjoyment out of like kind of scratching the surface on a bunch of things. But I find that this type of approach, when you're changing too many variables, starts to feel overwhelming, because what happens is that you have a learning curve on every one of these things that's been changed that you're not familiar with. And unless you're just like super excited about touching a bunch of different things, then you might run into this problem of like getting a little bit frustrated here, getting a little bit frustrated there, and all of a sudden things start to feel pretty crappy. I only have like this smidge of water that's got to last me the whole stream. I guess I could walk away and get more water, but I don't want to do that. We're going to champ it out. And I dare not message my wife and say, "Could you bring me some water?" Because she'll tell me to shut up. And she should. That's what microservices are good for. That one simple new service, do it in a language that fits best. Yeah, carve out small pieces of things. So the examples I like to give are like fixing all of, or not, maybe not all, but most of the other variables if you can. Right? So if you wanted to learn a new database tech, stick with the same language that you're comfortable with, right? If you wanted to try a new cloud provider and you're like, I've only deployed to Azure and I want to try AWS, don't go pick a new database to work with, a new language and tech stack to work with on top of a new cloud provider. Just take something you've already built, deploy it to AWS. If you wanted to go learn a new language, right? Like, don't go try to pick a new database tech and like pick one thing to go change that you want to go learn about, is my recommendation. And the reason I say that is because it's just reduced friction overall. It's not that it's wrong to go trying to do a bunch of different things. I don't think that there's like a wrong way to do that or to do like approach learning. I just think that for a lot of people that can be overwhelming. And if we're going to try to reduce friction so that you stick with it to try and learn, I think that's what I would recommend. Okay. So the example that I have of this for myself actually is like, when was this? Gosh, not too long ago. Okay, so if you're not a .NET developer, you might not know about Blazor. For those of you that are .NET developers and you're like me and you spend a lot more time working in like back-end kind of stuff, or the front-end experience you have is like WinForms and WPF, Blazor is a sort of tech stack that we can use in the .NET ecosystem that lets us build front ends for web applications using things like C#. So yes, you can hook up JavaScript to it. Yes, you have HTML in there, but you don't have to go like learn TypeScript or JavaScript and then go learn React. Like, you can build like a full UI without having to lean on those things. So yeah, a little bit of HTML, yeah, some CSS, but otherwise like you can write C#. And so for me, when I heard about Blazor, I was like, hey, this is awesome, because I always find that like I like gravitating towards C#, and when I have to use other things, it's just like as I'm an engineering manager, right? So if I'm gonna go build my own hobby projects that I want to turn into something, for me to go have to learn other things or spend more time, like I'm just less efficient. So Blazor, I was like, this is going to be such a cool opportunity, but I don't know it yet. So I was doing enough learning so that I could make YouTube videos about it. So that was a good way for me to practice. But the one project that really helped was I took something that was familiar. So I had my blog hosted in WordPress. So I took a familiar domain, my blog. It's in C sharp, so I'm not changing the language. I'm changing the tech stack here. I had spent time deploying to AWS before, was not enjoying that anymore with my WordPress blog. I had already been exposed to Azure for deployments, so I was going to move over to Azure, something that I was actively more and more familiar with. And then on the database side, I stuck with, to get things going, I just stuck with SQLite so that I could minimize, again, minimizing friction. I'm not deploying the database, dealing with connectivity issues or anything like that. It's like, it's just a SQLite database, man. It's a file on my computer. Like, let's just get this going. So when I was doing this, I had a snapshot of my database. I imported it into SQLite, was running this Blazor blog engine locally. And it really helped me get to a point where I could just like do small iterations. And I'm not saying I'm a Blazor expert by any means now, but I can navigate Blazor. I can make updates to my website very comfortably. Again, language is familiar. Any weird things, it's like, I can at least narrow it down to like, hey, this might be a Blazor specific thing. Let me go look into it and learn about Blazor. So that was a really good opportunity for me. Pardon me. Actually, hold on. Just gotta make sure my shorts aren't rolled up. I specifically did this when I was sick a few months ago. I had these throat candies. And instead of keeping a pile of them on my desk like a maniac, because I would just eat them all, I took this pile of throat candies and I put them on my bookshelf. So I'm going to get a throat candy. I'm going to get 2 throat candies. Nice. Okay, and I'm going to read the comments as well. Devin says, don't pay any attention to the people on social media who are constantly going on about how you should hyper-optimize everything. Yeah, it looks good on the gram, but try actually getting work done. Yep. There are some situations where extreme optimization can translate into sort of what the right thing, but it's pretty rare. Like, to give you an example, we have, let me eat this so I can at least start trying to get myself so I can talk. At Microsoft, the team I'm on for the routing plane, we serve like trillions of requests per day. And if we're able to make small optimizations, that can translate into a big impact, right? So for us, even, very small optimizations can help a lot. Are you running a service that's routing trillions of requests per day? No, probably not. Not to say that you couldn't. I don't doubt you. But, depending on what your needs are, at some point when you try to getting like crazy optimized, it's just not, there's diminishing returns, right? Jessica says, on the middle of mid-level, got rejected when applying from Flutter to native Android just because there's someone who is more of an expert on Android. Yeah. And so, Jessica, this is an important thing to remember too. And sorry, I don't mean to imply with what I'm about to say that this is not your thought process. I wanted to address the comment because I think that other people could have similar situations. In other live streams and some other videos I've made, we talk about this a lot where, unfortunately, you could absolutely crush an interview. You could be like, that's the best interview I've ever done. And you could genuinely impress every interviewer. And then in that round of interviews, they happen to have another candidate that also happens to do amazing. And they happen to do, even though you were amazing, they happen to do a little bit better in some aspect. And then you don't get selected because there's one position. And then the unfortunate side effect of that is that what can happen to a lot of candidates that actually did do really well is they can go, well, how is that possible? Like, I did so good. And you're telling me that even when I did so good, I'm still not good enough? And it's like really, it's crappy, right? But I always try to remind people, like, number one, if you don't get the position after an interview, it's not a matter of like, you must blame yourself because you're not good enough. And that's why I said I'm not suggesting that you're implying this for yourself. Just want to talk about it. So it's not a blame yourself thing, but I always just recommend to people, like, all that we can do is think about what's in our control. So I know it's way easier said than done, because I've absolutely had periods of my life where I dwell on things, and I'm sure I still will in the future. I think it's a human thing. I think it's important to think about what's in our control, and then we can focus on those things. So if you're like, hey, I thought I nailed that interview, and you're reflecting on the things that you could do better. If you were like, honestly, like, everything I did was spot on, the interviewers were giving me really good feedback, and like everything just felt good. If you reflect on that, you don't think there's anything you could improve on, then so be it. But I think there's probably always something. And I think if we can always look for the something to try and improve, then at least we can focus on that, because that's in our control. At the end of the day, when it comes to an interview, there are always going to be things outside of our control. The same thing with applying to jobs. You could have an amazing resume with amazing experience, and I don't know, like, your resume gets skipped over, right? There were 1,000 applicants, and somehow they used a keyword thing, or someone happened to just miss your resume, and then you're just not selected. Or they were going through the resumes and they were doing them in batches, and they started interviewing candidates before going through all the resumes. I'm not saying this is a good thing, by the way. I'm just, maybe that's what happened, and then they ended up hiring someone before they even got to your resume. Like, could be so many things outside of your control. So just a reminder, try not to blame ourselves for it. Doggy says, currently I'm getting a small company from 20 years ago, ASP Classic, IS Stack to Blazor. Nice. Containers. I see the struggle of those not used to learning. Doggy, what do you, maybe, I mean, no pressure, because I know you're participating in the chat. So I just want to ask, like, when you say, I see the struggle of those not used to learning, what, you want to elaborate on that? Because I think that could be an interesting take. Like, what is it that you're like, when you say they're not used to learning, how do you tell? Right? I think that could be interesting to dive into. Devin says you might have interviewed before lunch versus after. Yeah, like, literally, it could be something that's that simple. And I know Devin watches basically every Code Commute vlog that I have. I know, because he comments on every one that I have. Thank you, by the way. I think that people don't like hearing that kind of thing, because they end up saying, well, that's not fair. Like, that shouldn't have an impact. And I agree. Like, it should not. It should not have an impact on your ability to get interviewed and affect your role. But the reality is, like, that's not in your control. And all that we can do is focus on what's in our control. So, Nikhil says, by the way, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, let me know, because I've seen this name and I don't know if I've ever said it out loud. Nikhil, I think. Even after working for Microsoft on a contract role, my resume is not getting picked up for a Microsoft full-time role. Is there something I'm missing? It's really hard to say. What I can recommend, and this is for anyone who's watching this, whether it's live or recorded. I see you're on YouTube, and for folks that aren't on YouTube, my main channel is called Dev Leader, and thanks to Code Commute, folks were asking me about resume reviews, because I get all the time people will send me resumes and like, can you review it? And I'm like, no, I'm busy. And then I realized I could be busy because I'm making content. I could be busy making content about your resume if you want. So I started a resume review playlist. And if you go to, well, I can just send the link because I'm at my computer. I'll send the link in the chat. And if you want, you can send in your resume to be reviewed. One sec. And I'll anonymize it and stuff. It's free. Literally costs me money to get it edited. So one sec. I don't want it to play. I want it to give me a list. Why is it so difficult? It's like it's not. Oh, view full playlist. There we go. That was way more complicated than it was supposed to be. This is the playlist if you want to check it out. Again, if you're not on YouTube or you can't see the comments, you can't click them, it's just Dev Leader on YouTube, and then look for the Developer Resume Reviews playlist. And I would recommend, if you want to see what's involved, I would recommend, here, let me just show you so you can see. They get awesome thumbnails, by the way. Like, look at this one. I can't take any credit for that. That's just my stupid face, and the editor does his magic on top. I'd recommend watching one. You can see what's involved. First minute explains how to submit a resume. And yeah, I'll anonymize it. And then hopefully you get the benefit of some feedback on it. Like I said, totally free. Cool. I wanted to keep that marked though, so I could go back to my channel when I have to. There it is. Cool. Yeah. So check that out, and that way I can try to see, because it's kind of hard to say, you know, like, is there something magic that's not being mentioned in a resume for Microsoft? No. It's just big company, lots of applicants. So there might just be something general that we could go look at. And I'm happy if you want to send that in. I just take the time to make YouTube content for it. So, Holly Lee, I think this is a good question. Are there bad dev experiences that you should work on avoiding in your career? Okay, Holly, I want to ask for a clarifying question back so I can try and answer this. Do you mean, are there bad projects to work on, bad tech stacks to work with, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on, and because I think it's a good question. I just want to make sure I can give you some perspective, sort of that's more tailored and not just super generic. And then you're like, what the heck's this guy rambling about? Are there bad dev experiences that you should work on avoiding? Yeah, I want to know if you're more focused on like tech stuff, if you're more focused on taking a role, doing a project. Yeah, I think if you can elaborate a little bit, then I can try to tailor the answer. But I think this is a good one. Doggy says, so this is back to people that aren't learning effectively. Modern concepts which have grown over the years, hard to learn all at once. So you send an ASP Classic, server-side rendering all the time, skipped all the single-page application tech stacks. Now you deal with SSR, WA, mix of both, C# instead of EB, Docker, Kubernetes, GitLab, Git instead of SVN, long list to learn. Yeah, and then he's saying, currently SSR is the new thing, but like, is it? We had that back in the day with Perl, PHP, etc. Yeah. So kind of it's interesting how things change over time. I'm amazed that like people send bots into these channels on Twitch for my one Twitch viewer. Could be bad projects or bad career prospects. Basically, growing too general or too deep. Yeah. Okay. So I think that, what's a good way to answer this? I don't think that I can give you a one size fits all answer because this is a very typical it depends answer. Welcome to software engineering, right? Everything is it depends. So Holly's question is, are there bad dev experiences that you should work on avoiding in your career? And then elaborate to say it could be bad projects, bad career prospects. Are you too general, too deep? And my general advice is that I try to avoid extremes of anything. So, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. And Devin kind of said it's a pretty common thing, but what I would recommend is like being T-shaped. And T-shaped is like this concept of if you think about the shape of a T, the letter T, you have breadth, and the thickness of the top part of the T is narrow, right? It's a horizontal line. So you have breadth, but it's not very deep. And then you have one thing or several things. Maybe it's not T-shaped, but what's the other? I don't know, other letters that take that shape with more vertical parts. You could consider yourself like an expert in one or several areas. But the reality is like you're not going to be an expert on everything. And if you're an expert on only one thing and you have no breadth, that's also kind of dangerous. So dangerous, limiting is maybe a better word. So to answer part of Holly's question, too general or too deep, I think T-shaped is the sort of the middle ground answer for this, and that's my recommendation. Now, there are some people that have gone super deep on certain things, and they happen to align their career with that because they're an expert in like such nuanced things, and they're like, I'm all in on this, and I'm such an expert that people will pay me top dollar to be able to do this kind of stuff. You could go the exact opposite direction and say, I'm such a generalist that like I can get, I don't know, I'm able to work in, maybe it's in startups or something, and I'm able to kind of do a little bit of everything just enough and get things going. And you don't find it to be a limiting factor that you're not like, can't go super deep on stuff. So I think you can be successful in either direction. But I think that once you start getting too broad and with no depth, or like basically hyper focused on one thing with no breadth, I think that's where you start to have like limiting factors. I think T-shaped is probably the best way to hit the middle ground there. Bad projects, bad career prospects. I would say, in terms of bad career prospects, I realize what I'm about to say. Some people might say, well, it's easy to say when you're employed, like if you're looking for a job and you're struggling with that. I know some people are like, I'll take anything that I can get right now. Fully acknowledge. I'm just trying to say that if we can pick, I would absolutely not work in environments that don't have psychological safety. And what I mean by that is if you're in a setting, whether that's your team, the organization, whatever it happens to be, even if it's just like the relationship with your manager, if it's putting you in a situation where you're fearful to make mistakes or fearful to ask questions, that kind of thing, not a good spot. I think that even if you get paid really well, if you can work on interesting projects, that's going to be a limiting factor for growth because you will literally be fearful of doing things. Or you'll be put on, you'll be called out for doing things. You'll want to avoid stuff. We talk about like post incident reviews and having people like blame other people for stuff. Like environments like that aren't good. I think they are career limiting. I think if you have a manager that doesn't support you, and that can look different ways. One is if your manager is just like, what's a good word for this? I don't even want to say too nice. They could be, let's say that you have things that you need to work on and your manager's just like pat on the back, keep doing good work. And you're like, okay, I'm just taking the feedback, and you keep doing the work and nothing changes. Ever after years, I would say you have a manager that doesn't actually, pardon my language, they don't give a shit. They might be a very nice person, but like they're not helping you grow. Like, you need to be given feedback to grow. And I will give you sort of I don't even know how to say this properly. You might find that in your career, um, yeah, let me say this. It's not a fault of any manager. For myself, I have historically found myself like I'm quite motivated. I'm gonna go. That's called toxic positivity. Exactly. You want someone who can give you radical candor, right? Now, the example I wanted to give is not even a person's fault, except myself. In my own career, I've been quite motivated, right? I will go. I've described this on Code Commute as like, set me in a direction, move out of the way, and like I will go get shit done. And I'm very motivated to do that. Um, and that's worked really well for me in my career. And to the to a point where I'm like, I don't actually feel like I need to rely on my manager. I'm an engineering manager. I understand how the dynamics work between manager and IC. Been doing this for like 13 years now. So I've always kind of felt like I feel like I got it figured out kind of thing. But the reality is like, uh, especially at Microsoft, I should have been asking for more support. And not that I didn't have supportive managers, but there was a period of time where like I had no manager because he switched teams, and then I had a new manager, and then we had a reorg, and then I switched teams. And like throughout that, in my mind, I was like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like I don't need to rely on my manager for success, but like at my level, I absolutely do. Right. And I have had supportive managers, but I think that I needed to do a better job of asking for support. And those periods of time where I didn't have support, that should have been assigned to me like, you need to go reach out for more support, not just be passive, just as an example. Devin says, I wasted 10 years under a manager who wasn't interested in growth, not of himself, his team, or the organization. It messed me up. Yeah. Um, and then sorry, I'm just kind of catching back up in the chat. Have a broad index in your head and be able to dig in deep in the short time. Learn how to learn fast. Try learning methods. Yeah. And then Doggy says, I wonder why they don't teach learning methods. Yeah, like I always say that like I didn't like university, but one thing that university taught me was how I learn. And I'm very much a hands-on learner, and I didn't know that. I always thought from high school and stuff, I was like, I can just sit in this class for 15 minutes, see what the teacher's talking about, and like it just gets absorbed into my head. No, not at all. Does not work that way. Not for me. So hopefully here the need for psychological safety for growth, it's so important for me. Yeah. And many companies don't train managers well. Many companies don't train managers at all. Many companies promote engineers into management positions and go, good luck, and then expect them to be successful. And by the way, that's not a promotion. That's a complete role change. It's a complete role change. It's insane. And it's weird, right? Like you can go to college or university for like 3 to 5 year programs, study computer science, software engineering, computer engineering, whatever. What about managers? Right? Kind of weird. Kind of weird that we don't treat it with the same level, and then we just expect people to be successful and lead teams. It's very odd. Find out what you want. Being directed, work free, get things done quickly, want things done well, both. Does the comp fit? Yeah. So, yeah, Holly, I think hopefully that answers some of your question. I just want to scroll back up and see if there's projects. I think this depends on your manager. So I'll give you an example. I've always told my direct reports when they're asking about promotion and projects and stuff like that, I never tie promotion specifically to projects. I never say, finish this project and you'll get promoted. Ever. I don't do that. I've seen other managers do that. I think it's a mistake. And the reason I think that is because There's some situations where projects can get canned. They could be going very well, and something comes up, has to be deprioritized. It's completely outside of someone's control. And then what happens? Do we say, hey, I know you worked on this project, this big initiative for a year, and like that was your one thing that we tied your promotion to, and we just canceled it? Sorry, no promotion. What? Like that's not okay for me. For the overwhelming majority of developers, I feel like personally, for people on my teams, I am able to make a good case for their promotion if they work on projects like that and they get canned or something, the project, right? To be able to say, here's the amount of like how this person works, how they interact with others, how, like what they were able to deliver along the way. I feel like I can make a pretty good case for someone like that. Still, now other managers know because they'll say nothing. In the end, nothing actually got landed. Didn't ship it. Sorry, nothing to show. So it's kind of I have to be careful when I give advice on that kind of stuff because it depends a lot on the manager. Um, I think that even for me though, let's say at Microsoft, I think there's some levels of software engineers. Like I would say at my level, not I'm as a manager, but my level as an individual contributor. If you were working on a project and it did not land, while I feel like I could do a good job representing you, I know that when it goes to my manager, my skip level, and then beyond, they will say, well, where is the impact of that work? And if it hasn't landed, it's going to be very difficult to show impact. Because if it didn't accrue to anything tangible, then where is it? Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that like we couldn't address along the way. Maybe there's learnings from it. Maybe there's technology that we could spin off. Like could be a ton of stuff, right? It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but I think that it can be can make it more challenging. So with that said, for feedback on projects, I would say if you're stuck on projects that aren't going anywhere, you're not getting support you need, like that kind of thing, I think that can be a spot you don't want to be in unless you're super motivated to save it and that feels like something that you're excited about. I don't think that's a really good spot to be in. Would going into management hold you back into your career too? Yeah, it could for sure. So even if we don't talk about switching roles, okay? So as an individual contributor switching to manager, this can happen literally with career hopping. It can happen literally with going from like, say, senior to principal level. When you're at more junior levels as a developer or an individual contributor, there's the expectations of you in your role. They grow obviously as you're gaining levels and experience. It sounds like it's a role playing game, right? Except it's life as a software developer. Level 1, get 100 experience points. So they grow in terms of the amount of complexity in the work you have, your ability to work autonomously, that kind of stuff. At some point, there is, I'm saying some point really generically here because depending on the company, the leveling scheme, expectations, this could be different. At some point, there can be sort of a trajectory where it's not just like a linear step to the next level, and the expectations, the bar is set much higher to kind of break through to go to the next level. And if you are put into that position, whether because someone thought you were going to be ready and you're not, or because you were operating, you're kind of like burning yourself out, going way above and beyond, and you're like, finally, I did it. And then, you've sustained it long enough, you get promoted. Then all of a sudden, someone's like, that's the new expectation, though. So, like, hope you're ready to keep doing that. If you were already putting yourself into a state of burnout to get there, and you're like, just to sustain this now, I have to keep doing the same thing, that could be career limiting. So to give you an example, you might have been operating at like 100% of your expectations or above at some level, and now you get promoted and you're not able to keep up that pace at that level. So all of a sudden at the next level, you're underperforming. That can happen. I think this is a lot more noticeable with career hopping because the change can be so dramatic. Can be. And I'm not saying it always is. I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. I think it can be because you'll go from one company to another, different teams, different leveling mechanisms, different expectations. They might be similar, but you get in there and you're using that opportunity to like level up as well, right? So you were a level A at some company, now you're a level 2 at the next company, and on paper that's a higher level. So you got a promotion out of it. And you got brought in there, right? So they were like, we think based on this person's application and their interview, they can do it. And then you find like you're struggling to do it. Now, that might not happen right away. And this is why I caution people to nothing wrong with job hopping. I don't want to say that. I think if you're only doing that to try and sort of like cheat the system as fast as you can, I think absolutely you will run into a problem where you're like, I cannot do my job. Some people can interview really well, right? They spend just enough time at a company. They're like, I know that with what I have on my resume, I can, pretty this up, go interview, then they get a job. And they can't do their job, right? And sometimes people will do it just long enough where they're like, okay, time to go to the next company. And they make their career out of that. It can work for some people. I just don't recommend it. And then specifically to Holly's question, going into management holds you back. Yes. And I really feel for the people that their manager thought they were doing a good thing. They said, hey, I have this awesome engineer and I know what we're going to do. We're going to promote this person and we're going to promote them by making them a manager. Like what better way to promote someone who's been doing an awesome job as an individual contributor than to completely change their role from a very technical position to a people oriented position? What better way to promote someone? And then sometimes, and this could be different in different places too, right? Sometimes places expect managers still to be hands-on in code. I would say if you have big enough teams, it makes absolutely no sense to do that. Speaking from experience, I did that for 8 years. If you're unable to do your managerial expectations, like that's going to hold you back in your career, right? You'll be trying to do this role that you're ill-equipped for, and it's not your fault, right? And now you're going, well, I need to figure out how to adapt to this. So instead of operating it like a, high level engineer, you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing in this other role, kind of, floundering through it. And you might even be like, I don't even like this. Like, thanks for the promotion, but like, I don't like doing this at all. So I just think that for this kind of stuff, it's important to acknowledge, what the expectations are in your role, what your interests are, right? Especially going from IC to manager. If you don't like dealing with people problems, you will not like being a manager. It's all about people, right? So if you're like, I want to be a developer so I can never work with people, first of all, that's not a good option either. But second of all, if you are then in a manager position, it's going to be significantly worse. So Holly, I hope that helps answer some different perspective on that question. I think it's a really good one though. Okay, I don't see any other questions pending right now. Back to the newsletter article. The next part, and we kind of touched on this earlier in the chat, and I think this is like Doggy said something specifically about this. So kudos, Doggy, for the chat messages. Transferable skills are your superpower, right? So the reality is that when you're spending time writing code, in a language, working with a tech stack, yes, there are going to be some things that are nuanced to that language or that tech stack that you're learning about. 100% this is going to happen. But there's going to be a vast majority of things that you are doing, like on repeat or exploring and learning for the first time, that are absolutely going to be applicable to different areas as well. Okay. So I wrote down super high level list in this article. So like things like debugging, testing, and performance tuning, like those are some things that you could take a general approach to. You might have specific tools you're using in the tech stack or the language, right? You might use a specific testing framework for your performance tuning. You might be using some things to do metrics and analytics on stuff. But like that's some of the nuanced part, but your approach, your philosophy, like how you do this kind of thing in general, there are going to be common patterns that you can take away from that. So if you spent, in your 5 years of development, you've been debugging stuff, you've been writing tests for things, like validating things, putting regression tests in place, you've had to do performance profiling and stuff like that. Do you like, even if you had to go learn a new tool in a different tech stack, does that mean that all of a sudden, like, you don't even know what debugging means anymore? You don't know what a test is or what a good test would compose of? Like, you probably know those things. You've learned them over time. It's just that now you're using a different tool for that. So very transferable set of skills. I wrote down a bunch of stuff that's not even like necessarily code, right? Actually, the one that is specifically code still on this list is like, I just said like years of experience writing production code. Like what, regardless of the actual language you're using, what things do you care about in production code? Right? You're designing stuff to be extensible and readable so that other people can come through. You're designing it so that it can be testable. There's gonna be some common patterns that come up that regardless of the language you're using, you're probably going to want to leverage those, right? I wrote down, pardon me, one more candy. Familiarity with planning, reviews, deployments, cross-team collaboration experience, solid system design instincts. Devin says you can't go wrong learning to be a good communicator. Knowing how to talk with other developers and even non-technical folks will get you far. Absolutely, right? This is one of those things that I feel like a lot of people take for granted, either because they happen to be good at it, which awesome work, good for you. Not facetious. I think it's awesome if you didn't put any effort into this and you happen to be good at it. I don't think it's common. I think what's more common is that people don't realize how important it is, don't spend any time investing into it, and then have a lot of challenges with it. And they don't even acknowledge that it's a thing. And Holly says communicating with AI is a new norm too. And interestingly enough, like, yes, while I was more specifically thinking about like how to treat people like people and how to think about your audience, it's a really good point though, right? Like if you think about this example from Holly with like communicating with AI, can you think about a time where you were talking with ChatGPT or something else, you're playing around, you're like, I want to vibe code or something else. And you prompt it and you get it to try putting something together for you, just to realize you're like, this is garbage. Like, how did it do such a poor job of this? Like, AI must be stupid, right? Like, a lot of the time when that's happening, there are things that you could have done more specifically in your prompt. And it's really coming back to like, your audience in this case is an LLM. So are you communicating with your audience effectively? You have to give it more context, give it more details, give it examples. Roma says, Roma? Yeah. Been struggling getting a mid-level interview at a big tech company like Microsoft or Amazon. It seems like I meet all their qualifications. Any advice? Do I need to get a master's? Nope. Do I need to keep applying? Yes. And if you want, Roma, I don't know when you joined. Pardon me. I'm going to scroll back up in the chat. I have this playlist. You're on YouTube, so you can see my YouTube channel already. If you look for the resume review playlist, if you want, you can send in your resume. I will make a YouTube video on it, give it a review. Happy to see if there's anything I can identify. The common advice here, though, is like focus on what's in your control, right? If you're applying to these places, not getting any feedback, I would say keep applying. Look at what things you can tweak and tune. If there are jobs that stand out more, considering taking what might be a very generic resume and tailoring it to be a little bit more standout for that specific role, just to see if it helps stand out amongst the volume of applicants. Big tech companies will be very hard to get into given the volume of applicants. Right? It's just unfortunately the way it is right now. Not saying to give up on that, please don't. But don't be discouraged. And of course, if you're looking to switch, I would ask yourself, does it need to be big tech? Roma, I don't know your background. I think something that I would say to a lot of people is like, a lot of people won't even enjoy big tech. They'll say, well, yeah, I would, because they pay so well. And it's like, there are small companies that pay more than I'm making at Microsoft. So like, if that was your only goal, like you can go look for that. But like the way that big tech companies operate, you might not enjoy. I don't know. So that's not specifically geared at you. That's for you and anyone else who's thinking like the sort of the end game is like, I must get to big tech. Absolutely not. Like long term in my career, I don't think big tech is my end game. At some point in my career, I would love to have a software company. It's not going to be a Microsoft. It's not going to be, a $1 trillion company. I don't need it to be, but at some point in my career, I would like to work for myself. And I'd like to have engineering teams. Why? Just because that's what gets me excited. I would like to be able to do that. Does that mean that I'm quitting tomorrow? No. Does it mean next year? No. It's just like at some point in my career, that's what I'd like to do. So no, big tech is not my end game. But I'm finding like I have lots of interesting challenges. One of the things that I like in the space that I work in is that it's kind of a weird example to give, but we can take, I found if you're looking at like embedded systems where things are really constrained, like you really have to think about optimizations or like data structures and algorithms can really come into play. Then there's this like band in the middle where like some of that stuff just seems like everything's abstracted from it. So like, who cares? Aside from my interviews, like I don't really have to know all this stuff just because there's a library to do it anyway. And then some of the stuff we're doing on our team is like because of the scale that we're at, we go back to like, we need to know the little details because it's going to make a big difference at the scale we're at. So kind of interesting. I think that's like a fun part for me. But do I like the speed at which things move? No. And I think they move that speed for very good reason, but I don't enjoy that part particularly. Just kind of the nature of like when things are at this scale, they'll end up going slower. Holly says, I heard some SDs have better pay and work-life balance at a Fortune 500 companies that are not in the software industry. Interesting. Where their main sort of product is like not software. That's that could be very true. I don't know. I don't see why not. So that's cool. All right. So there might be other options. Fortune 500 companies are still huge companies, but maybe it's not directly like our company builds software to ship to customers as the primary thing, right? Could be I'm just thinking finance, right? Maybe they have a bank application or something that could be a thing, or internal systems that you can go build. Could be a lot of options there. Devin says, don't even worry about Fortune 500. I work at a company outside of tech and our pay bands are competitive in the Seattle market. Nice. And a lot of us aren't even in the Puget area or even in Washington. Yeah. We got less than 300 employees. There you go. I think there's lots of options, right? I say that not to be like, therefore, it should be so easy for you to get a job. Not what I'm saying. I think I'm trying to say there's lots of options I think some people are like big tech, so I have to select from like 5 companies. No, there's many options outside of that if your goal is pay band, just as a heads up. So, so transferable skills, hugely valuable if you're thinking about switching tech stacks. I wrote in here, because on the newsletter, one of the things that's like something to consider is this fear of, am I starting over, right? I'm a mid-level or I'm senior, but I'm going to go do a new tech stack. And like, am I starting over? I would say if you're going to a different company, something that you'll want to consider, I'm glad we're talking about like interviewing and stuff right now, is like, what does a job market actually look like? Now, this isn't a rule, but I would say that at big tech companies, and when I say big tech, I don't just mean like FANG, I mean like Fortune 500 companies. It could be just companies that are an established business that aren't like literally a startup fighting to stay alive. Bigger companies can often take a little bit more risk and invest a little bit more time. Meaning, if you are jumping into a new language or tech stack, but you have other years of experience as a software developer, they're not necessarily going to look at that and say, oh, but you're not an expert in JavaScript, so like, too bad, like no chance. If there's someone else that is an expert and they happen to check all the same boxes as you plus that, they'll probably get it. But point is, bigger companies can take a little bit more risk and time to invest with getting people ramped up, generally. To give you an example, and I've shared this many times over the past few years, at Microsoft, my first team that I joined, the whole team was, not the whole team, there's a few team members that were there, plus the new team members that were added were hired right before me. Of those team members, no one knew C#. Our team uses C#. And the second team that I was on, again, was an existing team, and then the new hires that came on board, I think one person knew C#. No one knew Rust, and they had to go learn Rust. Some people didn't know C++, and they have to work in C++, but we can take that opportunity to invest in them and wrap them up. Why? Because the next day, Microsoft isn't about to go under because someone couldn't on day one go write and ship stuff in Rust or in C# or C++. There are startups that are fighting to stay alive, and if you're unable to start delivering right away, it doesn't make sense for them to hire you. And I'm not saying that because like you aren't good or you're not valuable or that's the best approach. I'm just saying their goal is to keep the business alive and grow it. And if they have to take a risk on you to be able to hope that they can teach you and ramp you up quickly, that might not be a risk they want to take. Back to what's in your control, maybe not that, right? Like that's just the reality of it. So something to consider if you are applying to startups and you're like, hey, why is no one, I'm applying for C++ and I don't have any C++ experience on my resume. They might just be like, no, we can't take that risk. Maybe, right? Not every company, but just trying to put that into perspective, something to think about. Okay. And then otherwise, the last little bit here is at the end of the day, when it comes to resumes, you're doing this tech stack switch. In your head, you're kind of starting over in a language or a tech stack. By now, hopefully, we're on the same page. It's not resetting all of your experience. The point is, how are you going to stand out? Because All it could take is one applicant with similar experience to you, but they happen to have that experience in the target tech stack, in the target language, and then automatically it's going to look like they're a better candidate for that role. If all other things are equal, right? So I think that if we frame it this way, then we really need to think about how are we going to stand out? Right? You can't control the other people that apply. That's outside of your control. Doesn't make sense. But you can control your resume. You can control how you're showcasing yourself. So if you're like, okay, I do have side projects. Okay, how can I make these stand out as really awesome things? Or there was this project at work, and maybe on the surface, it's kind of like it's a so-so project, but like, how can you tell that story without like lying? How can you tell that story to demonstrate impact? Like, what was the value of what you did there? How can you make it very obvious for the reader? Sometimes, and if you do take me up on the resume review thing, you just want to watch a couple videos, sometimes I will read comments on the resumes, and in my head, I'm thinking like, this person probably knows exactly why it was such a kick-ass thing to write. But I'm like, as the resume reader, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I might not even know what you're talking about. But to you, it's very obvious. To you, the impact is very great. You might have even had kudos from your manager, your skip level manager. Maybe it was talked about in like a company meeting, and it was such an awesome thing. And how you relay that in the resume is just like, the value is completely lost. So it could be little, like seemingly little things like that, where you had such a good experience to call out on a resume, and then it just gets lost. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm noticing on resumes right now is like, there was a really good opportunity to demonstrate or showcase something, and it gets missed. Roma says, thanks for the response. I work for Honeywell right now, mostly working C++, just want more focused company. Where do I send the resume? You got to watch the first minute of a video on that playlist. I say it in every video. I don't put the link down because I don't want bots to crawl it. And if I tell you now, then you won't go watch a video. It's free, but you got to watch a minute. I'd recommend watching more, though. Holly says, startups are interesting because they would rather have something working than something optimized for another engineer to understand your code too. Yeah, it's true. So I spent before Microsoft, I spent 8 years at a company, and it was a startup, and it was just about like day after day after day. It was like ship value to customers, got to keep going. And then people would be like, oh, the tech debt. And we're like, okay, well, like, is that actually holding us back from shipping value to customers, or you just don't like the code? And it's like, well, the code's ugly. And it's like, well, we're not even touching that code and it's working. Like, forget about it. We got to keep going. Obviously, at some point, enough things are sticking around. Things become a bit more of a platform than just like, something we're just trying to stay alive with. And yeah, there were things that over time it was like, would have been nice if this was built in a little bit more of a robust way, for sure. But that company was very successful. Unfortunately, like, and some folks might know this if they watch Code Commute, like after I left, they IPO'd. And then I think a year after that, maybe 2 years, I don't know. But they got bought back to private for $2 billion. Like, it worked. We didn't have to hyper optimize things, right? There was tons of garbage code. I wrote most of the legacy code that was there at one point, like, unfortunately. So, it's, I think a lot of people, they miss it, right? They miss that, like, you have to, like, as a software developer working at a business, we need to be able to ship value to customers. If you want to resolve tech debt, you want to go rewrite things, you need to be able to demonstrate how that's going to help a business. If you're unable to do that, people get frustrated by this. They're like, well, we don't ever get time for tech debt. And it's like, make a business case for it. Have you ever successfully negotiated and overhauled tech debt projects that were worth it? Yeah, absolutely. I've done it both ways, where I've shut down tech debt projects and we've done things where we promoted them. Um, and ultimately, like, I've seen many times where people will complain about tech debt. As a third party, I've seen this happen where I've talked to like the product managers or project managers on teams that are organizing like the sprints and stuff for work, and having conversations with them where they're like, man, like developers are pissed off we can't get tech debt scheduled, but they're like, I don't understand what the tech debt is. And then I talk to the developers and they're like, oh, it's so crappy, they won't schedule our tech debt, like no one listens to us, like. And then it's like back to communication from earlier. Did anyone here communicate the business value to the product managers? No, you just said that the code was bad. Like, if you can't explain it to a way that the stakeholder is going to get the value out of it, like, it's not happening. That's not to say that it's not worth doing, but you might be terrible at communicating it. And sometimes we'd get into these conversations and it's like, well, what is the value? Like, what is it going to unblock? Like, what's it going to help with? And someone would make a case for it. And it's like, yeah, but that makes an assumption that we have to go back into this code and touch it. And like, we're not adding new features here. We're not even getting bug reports in this code. You just want to go make it look nicer. In fact, you are just introducing more risk at this point. It's not to say that the code wouldn't be written better, but it's already working. So it's not worth you doing that because the opportunity cost of you doing something else could be much greater. But yeah, we've worked on stuff where people would say we need to get this feature in place, and we'd say, look, things weren't designed that way. Like we cannot go build that on top to go follow up with more features after. Like, basically, if you want this added on, the tech debt that we would have to accrue to do that means like the next thing you want to pile on top of this is just like, it's going to keep being a recipe for disaster. It's going to be breaking a lot, or we're not going to have confidence that it works. So we have to find ways that we can present to stakeholders like, this is why, right? This is why we need to go do this work first. So yes, it might mean an upfront investment, but here's how much like we anticipate it's going to take. Here's why. So like, hey, this code doesn't have any tests on it. Like, you want us to go pile this stuff on. We're not confident it's going to not break anything. So like, we're going to probably ship this. It's going to have broken stuff. We're going to spend a lot of time fixing it. Doing a poor job of explaining this. But the point is that you collect enough data to present back to the stakeholders to explain, like, this is why. And I found just having open, honest communication, trying to explain the business value, and then without getting into all the technical details, like, I need to go touch this class and like this method signature needs to be like, don't get into those types of details. I don't give a shit. I wouldn't expect them to, right? But talk to them about the value that they want to understand. What's going to make sense for them to go make a decision on it. So I've seen it work both ways. And I say this as someone who at the time was an engineering manager and an IC. Like I got to play both sides all the time. So I think that's something that helped me, was like, I had to see it from both angles. And once you start to see how different sides are looking at things, it'll give you some perspective on how to more effectively communicate with those different stakeholders, right? Just having a product manager say, we're not doing tech debt is not going to make a dev team happy. And then having a dev team that just tells their product manager, we only want to do tech debt, like to solve or reduce tech debt. It's like, you just got to be speaking more on the same page, I would say. Okay, I think that's mostly it. The wrap up from the article is basically, don't change everything all at once, right? Try to keep your learning more narrowed down to something specific so that you can focus on that. I said, anchor your learning to something that you're interested in. That way, when you're getting challenged by things, at least it's still aligned with your interests. I said, be intentional about how you present yourself, because that will matter, right? So if you're thinking about your resume and how you want to stand out, be intentional about it. And then I said, lean on the skills that do transfer, right? So if you're like, well, I learned how to do all this stuff, but that was in C sharp and I'm not using C sharp anymore. Like, talk about things in a way that's very obviously transferable to other languages. Just being like, I'm a master in C sharp in these very nuanced things, and the job is for a completely different language. Like, it's just, it might not carry over as effectively as you might hope. Okay, and then Devin says another skill to develop is the ability to understand the business value that you're working on. Absolutely. And if you don't know, ask. I tell people this all the time. Like, it's helpful for many reasons. One could be just purely motivation. Number two is like, if you understand the value, the business value of what it is, you might have been presented a solution, it might have been documented some way, and you're like, wait a second, they want this done for this value. And if I wouldn't have asked the question about what we're trying to do and why, I wouldn't have thought about this other solution that might be even better or something like that. So understanding why can make a huge difference. So please ask, yeah. If you only ever see the technical problems without understanding the business value, how can you communicate the value of what needs to be done? Yeah. Right? Like, code is the tool that we use to solve problems as software engineers. The problems are going to be domain specific for our customers. So you need to understand that. Right? So hopefully that helps. Great questions in the chat today. Holy. I get it? Holy, yeah. Okay. It's a play on words. Okay, not funny. Okay. Okay, with that said, I'm going to wrap this up, though. I'm going to jump over to the part where I saw you guys on stuff. This is the newsletter. It's Dev Leader Weekly. I'll just put a link to it. Like I said, if you guys don't want to subscribe to a newsletter, it's totally fine. Folks on Substack, you already subscribe, right? If you don't want emails and stuff, don't worry. You can just check out the newsletter if you want to see. It's like a blog entry, right? So if you just want to see what the topic is, it goes out on Saturdays. You can check it out. And this is the one I walk through. I also link in the code commute video that it's generally based on. So, because I mentioned it a few times, Code Commute is my vlog YouTube channel. I'll put a link into the chat as well. It's just called Code Commute. And as you can see, I just drive to work usually and film. I don't have any new 360 videos from last time. But this is the video here that it was based on. So if you wanted to check out Code Commute, these vlog entries kind of fuel the content for the newsletter. I realize most folks, I think, on this stream today are actually coming from YouTube. So you probably already know my channel. This is the main channel. Sorry, that's the playlist tab. Boop. There you go. So this is the main channel. More edited down videos. Almost all of these are resume review videos. I have another one I have to film. A lot more like programming tutorials and stuff like that. So you can check that out. And speaking of programming, do have courses. So if you want to learn about C Sharp, you can check out this page here. These are my Dome Train courses. So there are 2 for getting started in deep dive. And there is still a 40% off sale, which is sweet. For you guys, not for me, because I don't get the money when there's a discount. But very proud of these 2. Proud of all of them, but these 2 are my most proud moments. And then if you're interested in stuff outside of C Sharp, I have a couple of courses with Ryan Murphy, who's an engineering manager at Yelp. So we have career management, we have getting promoted, behavioral interviews, and soft skills as well. So you can go ahead and check those out. And then the last thing, this is going to be a flashbang warning. It's very bright, sorry. This is Brand Ghost. So Brand Ghost is the project that I'm doing on the side for all of my content creation. So depending on how you got to my content, it's if it was from social media somewhere, everything that you see posted on social media from me is from Brand Ghost. So it's a content scheduling platform, and we're building out the sort of content creator dashboard so you can create all your content on our platform. AI assisted, you can bring in all of your sort of raw data that you want to work with. And if you're just getting started and you want to start posting on social media, you can use this totally for free to cross post and schedule content out. And that way, like, our goal is that as a new creator, we can help you build the momentum. A lot of people are like, I want to try it. And then they're like, oh, like, it's too hard, or I can't be consistent, or I can't possibly post to like more than just LinkedIn or more than just Twitter. Like, it's just too much work. You can write it once in a year and then post it everywhere for free. So that's what I'm working on. And like I said, I use it for all of my content creation. It is my, hey, that's even my Instagram. That's what that is. But then there's paid for options that have fancier features. So check that out if you want to get started with content creation. And if you have any questions, say you're interested in this and you're like, but I have no idea what I'm doing, just message me. Happy to chat about it. And that's it. Roma says, how often do you do these lives? I do them every single Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific, unless I'm sick or on vacation. Technically doing it while I'm sick right now. And then if you like this style, but without the interaction, I realize the interaction is the best part, but Code Commute is the exact same style. If you don't believe me, you can ask Devin. If Devin's still in the chat, he'll vouch for me because he watches all of them. But it's just kind of a stream of consciousness conversation about a topic. I just don't stream it live because answering questions while driving would be like absolutely not okay. But I think that's it, folks. I wanted to say thanks so much for watching. And I hope to see more folks next week. Sorry about the mic issue at the beginning. I don't know what's going to... YouTube, people are not going to watch it on YouTube now because they're going to be like, oh, this guy's screwed up. But